Hello, I'm Esther Githo. It's Wednesday, February 22nd. This is Africa 54. Russia's hypersonic missile ship arrives in South Africa for joint naval exercises, including China, coinciding with the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Jill Biden arrived in Namibia Tuesday on her first visit to Africa as U.S. First Lady, a trip that will also take her to Kenya. And in our tech segment, we'll learn about a hybrid social venture project in Uganda that builds entrepreneurship ecosystem. Ndiho will have the details. This and much more on today's Africa 54. Armed with hypersonic missiles that Russian President Vladimir Putin has described as unstoppable, the Admiral Gorshkov frigate has arrived in South Africa's Richards Bay for joint naval exercises, including China. David Doyle has more.
This is Russia's flagship frigate, equipped with new generation hypersonic missiles, arriving in South Africa's Richards Bay for joint naval exercises. That's according to Russia's defense ministry, which released this footage on Wednesday.
You don't have much.
The ship, named the Admiral Gorshkov of the fleet of the Soviet Union, was arriving for the drills which include China and that South Africa calls routine. However, the exercises have fueled domestic criticism and fears they could endanger relations with Western partners. South Africa says it is neutral on the conflict in Ukraine. Last year, it abstained from voting on a UN resolution condemning Russia. The start of the exercises off South Africa's eastern coast coincides with the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which Moscow calls a special military operation. It also follows Russian President Vladimir Putin's decision, announced on Tuesday, to suspend its last major nuclear arms control treaty with the United States. The Gorshkov warship carries the Zircon missiles, which have a range of 560 miles. They can travel at several times the speed of sound, making them difficult to defend against. Putin has described them as unstoppable.
David Doyle of Reuters filed that report. U.S. First Lady Jill Biden is in Namibia on Wednesday, the first stop on her two-nation visit to Africa. She is also scheduled to stop in Kenya. Biden's engagements are focusing on the empowerment of women and youth, food insecurity, and promoting shared democratic values. VOA's Anita Powell has more.
Jill Biden visited Africa 5 times as Second Lady, highlighting the plight of the powerless. Here she spoke at the continent's largest refugee camp in Dadaab, Kenya in 2011.
The mothers are bringing their children from Somalia, walking sometimes 15, 20, 25 days, and they lose their children along the way. The children die. So what I'm asking is for Americans just to maybe reach out and help, and because the situation here is dire.
Now First Lady, she returns to Kenya this week. She will also visit Namibia, the first U.S. First Lady to do so since the nation gained independence 3 decades ago. In addition to focusing on women and children, the First Lady will also draw attention to the dire food insecurity that is again gnawing at East Africa. In December, President Biden announced a $2 billion humanitarian package to combat the problem in the region.
Assistance is going to help ensure that children and families don't have to go to bed hungry.
Presidential spouse visits often provide a contrast to the strategic, muscular approach of the presidency, partly because, as Jill Biden herself points out, she has no executive authority and no mandate from American voters.
I know that I wasn't elected, but I knew that I had a part to play. And as spouses, we serve the people of our countries too, don't we? And we see their hearts and their hopes. We witness the small miracles of compassion and generosity between neighbors. We know what can happen when communities come together and how much can change when we work towards a cause that's really so much bigger than ourselves.
U.S. First Ladies are generally well received on the African continent, said Catherine Jellison, professor of U.S. Women's History and Gender History at Ohio University. Maybe because they have an advantage over the president.
There's just going to be warmer feelings toward a non-politician who's visiting than a politician, because there may be strings attached.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration has been wooing Africa to support Ukraine over Russia and recently dispatched Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen to Senegal, Zambia, and South Africa. And Russia's foreign minister has this year visited multiple nations that have historic or ideological ties to Russia or the former Soviet Union, like Mali, Sudan, and Angola. China sent its new foreign minister to Africa for his maiden voyage, a sign of that nation's deep interest in the continent. First Lady's visit opens Wednesday and is expected to last 5 days. Anita Powell, VOA News, the White House.
Nigeria's election is expected to set the tone for several elections across Africa this year. That's the view of Oge Onubogu, director of the Africa program at the Wilson Center. She spoke to Haiti Adams, host of VOA Straight Talk Africa, about what to expect on Saturday.
I want to get your assessment of what you think will be the defining moments that we should look out for in this election in Nigeria.
I think one of the things that we see going into these elections is that, unlike previous elections, these elections will be the 7th election since Nigeria's transition to civilian rule in 1999. And this will be the first election that will be conducted under the new Electoral Act that was just passed in February of 2022. So that's key because there's some new things within the Electoral Act that will inform how these elections are conducted. Apart from that, we've also seen the emergence of new political parties that have basically now expanded the space, where in the past the race had usually been between two major political parties. We now see the emergence of a third political party.
And that's a good thing, right?
And that is a good thing. That shows democratic development in Nigeria. That widens the pool and widens options for citizens. Apart from that, we also see an increase in youth participation as well. And if we go back to 2020, during the EndSARS protests, where young people in Nigeria were protesting police brutality, but as we look at the details around that protest, it went far beyond just protesting police brutality. I think it was also just a protest about wanting more from government, wanting more in terms of good governance. And we see that a lot of those sentiments translating as we move into these elections. When we look at voter registration and just data and information coming from Nigeria's Independent National Election Commission, we see the uptick in the number of registered voters, right, especially youth. And that's amazing to see that uptick coming from the 2019 elections, where there was low turnout, and a lot of people were actually talking about voter apathy in future elections. It's kind of amazing to see more young people now wanting change, but wanting change through the ballot box. That in itself it's a positive and something that should be noted. I think we also see an increase in the number of registered voters too as well. So as we look forward to these elections, I think everyone is paying very, very close attention. It's unclear. I think I've followed Nigerian elections since the transition. And with these elections coming up, it's really unclear. It's too close to call in many ways. And as we see the figures and we see the data, we may actually probably see a runoff with these elections. And in all of that, it is good. It shows a growth in Nigeria's democratic development.
That was Oge Onubogu, director of the Africa program at the Wilson Center. Be sure to catch Haiti's full interview on this week's edition of Straight Talk Africa. Nigerian voters head to the polls Saturday in what could be their most credible and close electoral contest since military rule ended nearly 25 years ago. It could also be the first election in which a presidential candidate who isn't from one of the two main parties stands a chance. For more on today's vote, let's go to VOA's Peter Clotty, who is standing by in Abuja. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Esther. How are you?
I'm good. So now as the polling day approaches, what are some of the issues that you're hearing, especially regarding the latest opinion polls as to who might be taking the State House in Abuja? Peter, can you hear me? All right, Peter, hopefully we'll get you back. So let's just take a break here. We'll be right back after a short break. Remember, we got Hades program coming up on Straight Talk Africa. Be sure to join her. We'll be right back.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
So we move on to another. In other news, a rights group in the Republic of Congo, Brazzaville, is accusing the government of hundreds of abuses last year, from torture to electoral fraud. The Development Action Center group says it documented 572 rights violations. Madagascan authorities are confirming the death of 4 people resulting from tropical cyclone Freddy that battered the eastern coast of the island nation Tuesday evening. Madagascar's National Risk and Catastrophes Bureau says over 16,000 people have been affected by the storm. And a court in Vietnam has sentenced a man to 13 years in prison for trafficking nearly 10 tons of endangered animal parts from Africa. Police say the man was found guilty of transporting elephant tusks, ivory, pangolin scales, and lion bones from Africa to Vietnam in 2021. Now, the earthquake-related death toll in Turkey and Syria now tops 48,000. For more on the devastating event, I'm joined by Hani Megali, Deputy Director and Senior Fellow at the New York University Center on International Cooperation. Mr. Megali, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much, Esther. It's very good to be with you.
Mr. Megali, you have eyes and ears on the ground. What are you learning about this dire situation? Describe to us what's happening right now in Syria and in Turkey.
Right, it's terrible because there were 2 earthquakes on the 6th of February, over 7 points in Richter scale, and then since then there have been at least 3,000 smaller tremors. On the Turkish side, we've had 9 million people affected, at least 42,000 people killed, 100,000 injured, more than 9,600 buildings collapsed or partially destroyed, hospitals, schools, medical facilities, water, sewage, etc. On the Syrian side, it affected mostly the area in the northwest, where we've had Syrian displaced, many of them. This is like 2.5 million people have been displaced several times. In the area, there's about 4 million people altogether. So they were living in tents, in refugees. And over there, I think the numbers killed are probably nearly now 8,000. The UN says over 10 million people have been affected by this earthquake. So it extends beyond this area. Mm-hmm. But the impact, I think, has been felt much more because in this area, there's been a war going on since 2011. So there's been bombing, shelling. Hospitals, I think 45% of hospitals are not active even before the earthquake. So the shock has been much heavier in that area.
And do you think that the international community and humanitarian aid organizations are moving fast enough to help survivors of the quake in both countries?
Sadly not, and it's a tale of two cities in a way, a tale of two responses. On the Turkish side, we've seen slowly but much more quickly than in Syria, 102 countries have deployed with assistance. We've seen 75 UN agencies and partners on the ground. We've seen 8,300 international search and rescue personnel working away to dig people from collapsed buildings. We've seen heavy equipment there. It's been very busy. Of course, it's a huge tragedy. But you see the assistance, you see the tangible international response. On the Syria side, unfortunately, there's none of that. And for a whole week, while people were asking for help, only 50 people made it across the one crossing between Turkey and Syria to provide assistance. The story behind that...
Right. Mr. Meghale, we're going to have to revisit this issue because it's ongoing. The situation, of course, is very dire there. We want to thank you very much for your perspective. Hany Meghale is Deputy Director and Senior Fellow at the New York University Center on International Cooperation. We're going to go back to Abuja, where VOA's Peter Clotty is standing by. Peter, I lost you, but I want to know what the latest opinion polls indicate as to who is the front runner, perhaps going to be at the State House in Abuja.
Well, Esther, 3 different polls that have come out show that, one, Peter Obi is the winner. The second poll says Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu of the ruling APC party will win Saturday's election. And then the third poll says that Atiku Abubakar, former vice president and presidential candidate of the main opposition People's Democratic Party, will win. So 3 different polls coming up with 3 different winners. It remains to be seen who will take the day on Saturday.
And in the midst of that, Peter, we know that women and the youth have an agenda here. They have a say and they're demanding certain things. What are you learning from the women of Nigeria and the youth for whoever takes over the presidency?
You know, talking about women, VOA just had a town hall, outside town hall of women. And the women were expressing interest that the political parties will need to find space for them in order to run for the elections. And that sometimes they prefer men with deep pockets to run. Interestingly, there were some women who are running for office, both for senatorial and House of Representative elections. You have only one female presidential candidate. They are saying it's not enough, and that women should be allowed to be in the forefront. The youth this time are energized. They want to be involved. They are very vociferous on social media platforms. They are expressing interest in this particular election, although experts are saying that usually they are not forthcoming. They don't show up during polls. This time around, they said they are interested. They want to have their hand on who becomes the next president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Peter, it's a time when everybody needs some cash in the pocket, and we heard the Naira is not available as much. Has the situation with the currency changed as we speak?
Well, the currency issue has been a big political issue. Experts are telling me it will have an effect on who wins the election. And in fact, the problem a lot of people are expressing is that although they have money at the bank, they cannot withdraw the money. Even if you have a foreign exchange, you go to the bureau exchange to change foreign currency. They cannot give you cash. They have to load the money or mobile money or put it on a credit card or debit card for you to use. The ordinary people do not necessarily have banks, and so they are finding it difficult. They are using mobile phones. You have over 290 million people who are using this app. So the app is burdened, and the processes are not going through quick enough. People are expressing frustration. The Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has issued a number of stories and press releases saying they are on top of the issues. They are calling, the Nigerian population is calling for a review of this policy. They are criticizing the timing of it, and they are saying, some, even the APC people are saying that this will have an impact on who wins Saturday's elections.
Right. Peter, thank you very much for your reporting. We'll catch up tomorrow. VOA's Peter Clotty reporting live for us from Abuja, Nigeria. We're going to go reverse gears here and go back to the story of First Lady of the United States, Jill Biden, visits to Africa. And for more insight, I'm joined by Paul Mathibe. She's a political analyst right here in Washington, D.C. Paul, it's good to see you. Let's start off with this First Lady's trip to Africa, Namibia specifically, and she's going to head to Kenya. And this follows Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen's visit to Africa, also U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield. What's Biden's administration's message here to the continent?
Well, what they're trying to do is they're trying to stress that they are earnest, that they are sincere about strengthening their partnerships. The one aspect that they have been stressing is the element about partnerships. Now, you'll know and have seen that China has had their vice premier who visited South Africa, met with President Cyril Ramaphosa. Russia has also had their foreign minister, Lavrov, who has also made multiple visits to Africa. So the approach that the United States is making is their way of showing they have a different approach. It's a contrasting approach to how China and Russia have been visiting the continent. So Dr. Jill Biden, you're quite right, is on the heels of Secretary Yellen, of the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield. And recall that in August last year, Secretary of State Antony Blinken also visited Africa. In fact, he was also in Southern Africa, in South Africa, where he launched the U.S.-Africa strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa. So this is really because they're following through on the promises that they had made at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in December in Washington, which was hosted by President Biden. He had made the promise that high-ranking officials, including his vice president, including the Secretary of Defense, will be making visits, and then he himself, the president of the will be visiting Africa this year, it's anticipated.
Paul, I'll have to get back to you so we can see what comes out of it, and for more analysis, thank you very much. Paul Mathibe, a political analyst here in Washington. And it's time now for our tech segment, and joining us now is our tech reporter, Paul Ndiho. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Esther. A new hybrid social venture is partnering with universities in Uganda and Tanzania. Building an entrepreneurship ecosystem is underway. Startup Hub Africa aims to unlock potential change makers to create innovative and scalable businesses across the continent. For more on the initiative, I spoke to Matthias Mobius, co-founder and team lead catalyzer for the Kampala-based Start Hub Africa. Welcome to Africa 54.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks so much, Paul.
You came up with an idea of trying to empower young entrepreneurs across Africa, but you're based in Kampala. Why Uganda?
Uganda is an amazing country, amazing people. It's an amazing time also to do it because it's safe, secure, the quality of life is good, all is fine. And at the same time, there's a big drive here in the ecosystem to do something. Everyone's talking about entrepreneurship. A friend of mine was here in Uganda and working on an entrepreneurship program in a rural setting. And when he was here, he had conversations with lecturers from universities, and support is not so much happening at universities yet, especially innovation support, startup support, when it goes more into the tech direction. So we were a group of students with similarly diverse backgrounds, and we thought, hey, let's see if universities want to work together, start a project around this, and this is how we got started. Through Skype, signed some MOUs with 5 universities here in Uganda, and we got started. And I then, shortly after, I finished my master thesis, and I moved here to Kampala early 2018. And since then, we're pushing to build an organization around supporting entrepreneurs at universities, and now also beyond that.
What kind of support are we talking about?
This has changed a lot over time. By now, we are super deep in the university system. How we started is that we worked with the business faculties mostly. We had a training of trainer concept, worked with lecturers from the business and entrepreneurship faculties. They would go back, so we co-created a curriculum with them. And what we're doing now, and we're at more than 10 universities here in Uganda and also in Tanzania by now, how we do it is that we're really building a student-led innovation movement. We are working with the student communities. We identify student leaders that are running businesses or that are intent on starting something, have ideas, that are entrepreneurial, and we help them start entrepreneurship clubs at their universities. And now these clubs become a center for the student community that is interested in starting something to come together, do activities, discuss, network, but also invite speakers and so on. And now our team supports them to reach out to the business communities, to do fundraising, and to run continuous, meaningful activities at these universities.
How do you sustain this business model, or how do you raise money to stay afloat?
I think we're really bad at fundraising, actually. So we started to build a business around it, and I think this is a good thing. So how we cover all our bills, we're a team of 20 people full-time on the ground here in Uganda and Tanzania. We run a consultancy, and we implement innovation projects as a service. We do research, market and needs assessments. We work with NGOs who want to switch from the more normal way of how they run their programs to also in a stronger way implementing entrepreneurship as a core component of their activities to build livelihoods, and so on. So this is, we make a margin there, and we donate it to our own Ugandan NGO, and from there we run these activities.
There are a lot of analysts who have said that Africa doesn't lack ideas, or young people in Africa don't lack ideas, but they lack the support, they lack this kind of help where you guys come in and give them that support right from the ground. From your experience working with young Africans, what has surprised you the most?
The dreams are very similar to the dreams of a student in Germany, right? You who wants to start something, you want to build something big, and so on. So that there were not so many surprises there. I think the big difference is just the infrastructure here. That is there, the way how university works, and I was probably particularly spoiled from my university and studying physics because I never had to attend any lectures. Our professors didn't care, right? And I think here it's just much more school-like, and that doesn't really build this free way of thinking.
What's the future of StartHub?
We want to go super deep on the support that we're rendering, because we have seen that just running more or less generic trainings doesn't solve the key challenges that entrepreneurs have. So our hard job.
Oh, thanks, Paul. And